Yeah.
Okay, that's a continued story. So
Always fun to get I mean,
the
they are
thought
also,
that
by the way, they are all Krishnas, okay? They are also part of, yes. And
And he's having a slow day.
yeah, exactly. See, you gotta have a different outlook on this. And, he's challenging all of us to consider, okay, if something that, it kind of like shook us up, isn't it? Like that shaking us up, for a second, Jason, you might have forgotten that you're Jason, and I forgot it's me. Oh my God, what happened, right? That he's going to talk about that in chapter 10, the Vibhuti, where we are so blinded by our notion of me. When something like this happens, that is your being, that is your being. So that is something that how can you dissolve all these external selves constantly, and every disturbance or everything that comes across on this planet, how can you remember? That is that smarana, right? So you can start with this practice of yoga meditation as we understand. I call it Santa Monica yoga because West has taken yoga to a different level. um, so yeah, life force entirely drawn up meaning that, away from the senses, internal, right? So most of the times our life forces are driven by our eyes and ears and our sex organs and hands and touch and all that stuff, right? All the doors of senses closed, the mind shut into the heart, the life force taken up out of its diffused. By the way, when they talk about heart and brain and all of that stuff, you understand that he's not talking about the physical heart, right? We do have this whole layer of subtle non-physical part of us where we tend to call, oh, this is my mind and this is my intelligence and this is my, I'm speaking from my heart here and all that stuff, right? It's definitely not coming from the physical heart, but that's the heart that he's talking about here, the subtle thing. The life force taken up out of its diffused movement into the head, right? Diffused movement, typically it's diffused out via these horses, the senses. But here we are collecting them all and bringing it, he wants us to bring it towards our head. He wants us to give a location, and that's what the meditation, when you're sitting with somebody else, when they are guiding you through the meditation, they're telling you like, hey, bring your whole mind, concentrate on a dot or concentrate on your center of your eyebrows, right? That's a common thing. And in fact, that's what the Sanskrit thing means here, and here they have translated it into the head. The intelligence concentrated in the utterance of the sacred syllable Om. So a little thing about Om, which is Om is completely meaningless, but it's a word when you break it out into A, U, Ma, right? That's the breakup of Om, is sort of like the origination of all the words. We today only identify, if you look at ourselves, right? Our mind is just a soup of words, for anything, be it, let's say I say rose, immediately there is a certain imagery that starts popping up because, you've read about it, you've seen about it, you've heard poetries about it, and you've heard other people talk about it. So there is a connotation of beauty around it, right? And then there are other things on the planet that, we utter the word, immediately a whole baggage of judgment starts swirling in our head about that, right? So the idea of Om is what Hinduism wants to give us is a word that will not connotate anything. Unfortunately, now Om has this whole connotation of spirituality, right? But at the root, right, or at the literal level, it is a meaningless word. Why meaningless word is important? Because it is not going to conjure up all the baggage, which means now you can concentrate on, staying away inwards, right? Um, and he says that you can say Om, and that is supposed to kind of also bring you back to that center, and slowly that utterance has to become like an inward utterance as well, right? As the meditation becomes deeper, and it's conceptive thought in the remembrance of the Supreme Godhead, right? So this supreme Godhead and all of that stuff, unfortunately, all these words seem so unreachable for our society these days, right? But these texts were written long back ago. All that means is just something that we don't understand, right? We can understand myself as a father, but even before the father, I am this human being. What does this consciousness mean, right? And it really all just, that's all, it's the same consciousness that is in all of you. And if you start thinking about it, that consciousness is the only thing that is making this laptop in front of me sort of exist. If I am not conscious, then the laptop is useless, right? So it wants us to, like, the Hinduism wants us to kind of not assume, but understand this oneness of this very fundamental thing that allows us to enjoy life, be it with other people or other things. And that's how I understand the Supreme Godhead, right? Continuous remembrance of that. He who goes forth, abandoning the body, he attains to the highest status. So that's that. And then there is all this concept of rebirth, and he talks about how on that last stage, right before death, when you are going to pass away, if you might consider, you might think, oh my God, what is going to happen to my daughter? Or you're like, oh, what is going to happen to all of my wealth and all that stuff, right? So there's a lot of these, and I don't want to leave and all of that stuff that is just going to come clobber your mind. But death is going to be certain, right? We all are going to die. So if you leave with that desire, this planet, what Hinduism says is that you will get another life, and you're going to come back and try to resolve these desires that you have been carrying along with you. Okay, but there is a different understanding that I want us to consider, which has also been presented in that No Self book. But in general, I've always been thinking about that in that sense, is that this, we are going to come to our last stage. And what has Krishna or Buddha and all of these people achieved is this lack of fear of death. Meaning, how can I live my life today happily without worrying about this death, right? Our daily constant battles and conflicts that we have, likes and dislikes we have, is this fear that I'm going to die. Somebody's going to kill me. Somebody's going to rob me of the joy that I have today, right? So ultimately, the fear is of death. But if we constantly are afraid, we are not really living, right? So, and also, so that is one way, right? How can, while we are alive, while we are aware, how about we consider the fact that, of course, we're going to die, right? Okay, that's a given thing. All right. So by the time I get there, how can I resolve all my needs? Fine, you can go and do all the activities that you want to do and all of that stuff. So that's one way to satisfy, but you will come to know that all these desires and all this happiness that you have associated with these objects outside, it doesn't really fulfill us, right? 100%. So that notion of satisfaction or happiness has nothing to do with the object. That understanding, obviously we know from books, but we all have to come to that understanding, right? And all these joys that we feel outside, pleasures and all of that stuff, once that pleasure is over, we are left with nothing, right? Or sometimes we are unhappy that we are not able to extend that pleasure, right? So there is always suffering hidden in all the pleasures, in a way. That's what all these books want to tell us. But that is something that we have to understand, that, right? And once we understand that, then this drive to go out to the pleasures is just going to dissolve. And that dissolution is going to help you on that day when you're going to pass, right? Okay, I lived my life fulfilled and happy. And when the life was given, it was told to me that it is going to be ending. It's not given that we're going to live forever. And the from rebirth perspective, right? Daily, our childhood, our youth, from then on, we have been going through all kinds of gamuts of desires. Our desires that were there when we were in our teens are so different than when we are in 50s or whatever, right? So our selves have changed. And as we are morphing these selves, the old selves are dying, right? The old selves are dying and new selves are forming based on new sets of desires. So as those selves are dying, there is a certain last wish or last desire as you're morphing into this new self in a way. And that is that's how I see this rebirth. I mean, I'm not 100% sure. Nobody's going to be 100% sure if we really come back uh, to this planet. But the one way to look at this is that, this is eternal. Like, we are eternal beings. So which means, do we want to come back to this circle of suffering over here? Or do we want to exit this whole cycle of suffering, right? And that is that moksha or liberation. Um, so so then he talks about immutable being, sort of, right? So there is we see a lot of things getting created and destroyed, right? The universe is created, universe is destroyed, and then senses tend to detect this, right? The change. I mean, basically what our senses is doing is detecting the change. If things were constant, permanent, 100% all the time there, guess what? We become blind to it. So our senses need that change, for it to detect anything. And then there are things that have not come about, right? So those are the unmanifested things, right? So what he says is that I am beyond that, right? There is something on top of which this manifestation and unmanifestation is going on, right? Creation and destruction is going on. So there is some layer below that, and that is that, in quotes, me. And we all forget, have to remember that, right? Constantly. That's smarana, right? And that kind of understanding is very difficult, right? It's very difficult in the sense that, um, we are really dependent on senses and logic, right? And this immutable that they are talking about is really hard to detect. And that is something very few of us in the whole humanity, they seem to have reached that, right? And one example one of the Swami gives is that, fish, for example, right, in the ocean. So this is a good way to understand God, is that everything is God, right? Everything is God, basically. So fish is clueless of the ocean, right? Fish might be able to be removed from ocean, but fish doesn't really, like, if they are permanently living in deep ocean, right? If you try to, let's say, you're able to talk to them, for them, it's not there. The ocean is not there. They have no idea what ocean is because they have not seen the other side. Much like for us, we don't particularly, of course, we notice air and all that stuff, but it's because it is constantly there, we don't really notices it until there's pollution or something, right? Um, um, so we cannot be quite removed from God. That's something that comes across here from this notion of immutable, that is constantly there, right? That's the point. It is not going to come and go away. And anything that is getting created is going to get destroyed, and that is part of this whole state of this immutable thing that they are talking about here. Things are going to come and go, right? And that's sort of unique in Hinduism, I would say, is that destruction is also part of God's work, right? In a way. Um, So he also talks about these two paths up there, right? So there is a bright path and a dark path. So there is a lot of symbolism, and like he talks about rising moon and waning moon and waxing moon and all that stuff, right? So he says, like, if you die in that state, then you pass. Now, a lot of people take that very literally, right? In Hinduism, rituals and stuff like that, they say, oh, if you die on this particular day, then that's a good thing and all of that stuff. But really, all it means is the light that he's talking about, and this metaphorical moon that he's talking about, is our mind, in the sense that our mind is conscious because of that immutable thing that is giving it this notion of being in control. um, so there's something that makes our physical eye to see the color, but not just see the color, but also appreciate. There's a feeling of bliss that, or a state of happiness or sadness, obviously, that comes along with just observation. Is like, a lens might see a thing, but can a lens become happy after seeing something? Probably not. We have no idea. Maybe it does. I have no idea. But just looking at oneself, there is something more to the eye, and that more to the eye is that inner light, right? And there is something deeper within us that is making, it's kind of like that. That's the sun, if you will, right? The notion of constant existence, the immutable thing. Moon is our mind. Moon doesn't have its own light. It is the reflected light from the sun on the moon that lights up the night sky. So that's the metaphor, yeah, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting, but oh well. That is chapter 8. So if you do visit that, you can now maybe understand it differently. Chapter 9, to me, by far, is a deeper dive on devotion. So here he talks about king knowledge, right? The highest form of knowledge, highest secret, the wisdom of all wisdoms, the secret of all secrets. It is a pure and supreme light which one can verify by direct spiritual experience, right? So this is what we talked about, where um, so for example, right, one Swami says, like, if you were put in a pitch dark room, right, complete darkness, like, know you can't hear any voice, no sight, no light whatsoever, right? Now, what exists? There is that um, inner, like, you cannot get rid of that feeling of I, right? You know that you exist. And that is that, direct spiritual experience that you need to feel out in the world as well, right? When your senses are showing something and your mind is making up stories and all that stuff, right? Um, So it is the right and just knowledge, right? That spiritual experience is the only wisdom, is what he's trying to say, the very law of being, right? There's this whole thing about, like, dharma, the word dharma or religion. That's a very loose translation of the word dharma. But dharma kind of means the law of being, like the fire has the law of nature, which is it will heat things or light thing. So everybody comes with this inner dharma, if you will. Has nothing to do with which father gave you birth, or, there's no lineage whatsoever, no caste system whatsoever. But people took it to an extreme, and, caste system came about. But everybody has equal right to this kind of a spiritual experience, which was very much prevented in Indian societies, where they said that this fourth caste cannot do this, and the highest caste can only read the scriptures and all that stuff, right? So all kinds of crazy things happened back then. So here he also talks about that. But faith is necessary. He again comes to that. The soul that fails to get faith in the higher truth and law, O Parantapa, there's like varieties of names of Arjuna. They have a very deeper Sanskrit uh, understanding of, you could literally have a whole series around all the names that he uses for Arjuna throughout this, right? um, get faith in the higher truth and law, not attaining to me, must return into the path of ordinary mortal living, right? Subject to death and error, right? This life is an error, is what he's trying to say. It is a mistake and evil. Um, undetectable, okay. So yeah, so there is some interesting phraseology here, right? By me, all this universe has been extended in the ineffable mystery of my being. All existences are situated in me, not I in them, right? So that is that base that we talked about, the immutable thing, right? That is undetectable by our senses, right? Because our senses can only detect what is changing, creation and destruction. So this thing is not created nor destroyed, so our senses can't really detect it. And so he says that all these existences are happening in me. I am not in them, right? So I am outside, even though all of these forms are coming up and going away within me. And yet all existences are not situated in me, right? He immediately kind of uh, first he says situated in me, yet all existences are not situated in me, he says, right? Behold my divine yoga, myself is that which supports all being and constitutes their existence. It is as the great, the all-pervading aerial principle dwells in the etheric that all existence dwell in me. So sort of like I was giving all these examples of ocean and air and all that, right? So he's touching upon that again here. That is how you have to conceive it. It's a metaphor that he's giving him to kind of think about this undetectable me. Why is he talking about this? Is that we all have this within us, right? And in every action that we are taking out there, we always want to kind of remember that that me is the real me. And now suddenly the outlook on the world changes, like the hatred or the likeness that love or whatever you feel to the other person will hopefully morph, right? Like that distraction that we had for a moment ago, right? There are certainly two ways to look at that. And if you immediately go back to that undetectable me, as if you're sitting in the dark when there were no stimulus happening. So this stimulus did something to me, that disturbance in my mind. Okay, so this disturbance happened because of that distraction. All right, can I switch that off? I can tell my mind it's okay, no problem, it's fine, right? Otherwise, all of our mind's thought process lead to more thoughts, and more thoughts lead to more thoughts, and we kind of go into this negative cycle. And most of the humanity's progress, if you will, is just this, fear of the other, if you will. And there are some interesting words he uses here. He calls people, now here, I think Aurobindo is being very kind. He says, deluded minds despise me, lodged in the human body, right? Krishna is in human body. So here he is not just talking about himself, but he's sort of kind of like urging us to, like, can you potentially see a God in this other human being who is doing hateful things, right? Um, in the human body, because they know not my supreme nature of being. That is that undetectable me, right? The immutable me, Lord of all the existences. All their hope, action, knowledge are vain things, right? So he is literally talking about us. Um, when judged by the divine and eternal standard, and we'll talk about that in a moment, they dwell in the Rakshasic and Asuric. This is something that we covered in also in chapter 14 or something, I think, where he talks about, oh no, this was the chapter 16, yes. we all are out of balance is what he's trying to tell us, right? We are not in balance with the law of nature. So we are asuras, meaning we are not in sync, if you will, nature, which deludes the will and the intelligence. So whatever we call as intelligence, he calls it as deluded intelligence, because it is you are acting upon some bias, biased intelligence, if you will, and then you're going to take an action out there in the world, which is going to stay biased for rest of the people. So the actual Sanskrit word is mood. Mood actually kind of means varieties of things, right? And one blunt meaning is idiots, is what he's trying to use, sort of. But deluded mind is a little bit nicer, I guess. So he says that they will despise me, they're out of sync, and they waste time on developing useless intellect, is what he calls it. Vain hopes, the hopes are about, tomorrow I'm going to have the second house and things are going to be better. And we are all walking towards death. We don't really realize that, but we are always thinking that, oh, this is going to protect me tomorrow. This is going to protect me tomorrow. Or some respect, Nobel Prize, or I don't know, something like that. Something that is boosting my ego. People are going to say nice things about me. If I do this, people are going to say nice things about. These are those vain hopes. Useless is what he calls it, right? He calls it as a waste of time. And then there's vain actions and vain knowledge. We'll talk about that and the divine eternal standard in this next. Vain actions tend to be all kinds of things that are like, they ultimately tend to be self-harming. And why are they like this? Is because we are dependent on the others, right? All of our actions are dependent on others, to be somebody for others, lead to nothing useful, as per him. So for example, one Swami talks about anger. Anger is a way to punish oneself for others' mistakes, missteps. Anger, regret, anger sort of becomes our continuous cycle. So we carry these deep angers within us, and something out there triggers that. And we say, okay, that thing made me angry. But you had that anger within you, right? So you should actually thank that person who allowed you to kind of face yourself, which is that angry self, right? And you can do something about it. And vain actions are always harmful, with hidden anger, ego, and jealousy. We talked about the consciousness and how it is kind of muddled with all these other things, right? So we are not the clean self. And vain actions requires one to look forward to prosperity tomorrow, right? And he sort of defines this as the actual sin, right? Even though your actions that you do out there, maybe you're helping a poor person, maybe you're doing something nice according to the world's judgment, right? Societal judgment. But if you're not doing it with the right mindset, it is a sin, right? Meaningful actions lead to results here and now. Most of the time, these are the things where, one example Swami gives is, I guess I did not, yeah. So I mean, I changed that. I said, okay, imagine offering a seat to a needy passenger, right? You're sitting somewhere, and for no reason you say, oh, I think this person needs help, and you just get up. It's not a big deal. You're not going to win a Nobel Prize for it. Nobody's going to watch it. Nobody's going to thank you, and that's fine, right? You do it, but when you walk away from that situation, guess what? Within yourself, you sort of feel like, oh, that was good, right? Of course, you don't want to make that into an egoistic thing. That's that bliss that you don't even know. There's a certain kind of a feeling. Most of the time, the results are here and now, and that is that constant bliss, right? So you immediately get that, and you know that you've done, so this is kind of like the Swami kind of explains, like, how can I look at my action being meaningful? And he says, well, if you don't see the results here and now, then you are doing some vain, useless action. And they most of the time they tend to be very simple for us to do. They're not some complicated, like, I'm writing $1 million check and stuff like that. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And so there's this whole complexity involved in doing that. And it's really very simple. Even though you're writing that $1 million check, maybe it's an act where you don't feel like you deserve anything in return, right? Meaningful actions make us prosperous now, right? That prosperity is more about that inner wealth. You might not physically, like, from a world health point of view, wealth point of view, you probably are not becoming wealthy. But what is wealth ultimately, right? Wealth is the notion that brings us to a certain level of happiness. We feel like, if we have safe house, big backyard, we will feel happy. So this happiness that wealth, outer wealth is bringing, um, it is coming from our inner consciousness, right? So we have the whole, um, reserve of happiness, if you will. And that is what the meaningful actions will tap into. So definitely won't make you rich, but the book wants to consider that as a virtue. Now, most of the societal ethics demand certain actions, right? Um, with some expectation, right? You do something this good, and then God is going to be nice to you, or people are going to be nice to you. So you're going to be winning some award at some function or something, right? So all of that, he calls them as vain actions, right? He in fact calls them as sin. So that whatever you think or people think you have done good, that's nothing. So there's also, he talks about knowledge, right, being vain. So a knowledge is vain if you just read it and you maybe repeat it. Some people like to read Gita again and again and again and again, right? A lot of people kind of do this mantra recitation on their time, and they think that is going to take them to the next level. But really, is it becoming that I experience that I talked about in the dark room with no sound, no light, that I that for sure is there, right? That is how these readings, whatever readings you guys are doing, everybody is doing, right? If you can't um, associate with that kind of a closeness with it, then it is sort of useless. It is yet another thing that is catching dust on your shelf, right? Or mental shelf. Um, of no use to self. There's a lot of knowledge out there. We are filled with it. And, we tend to, thanks to Facebook, we are always giving knowledge to somebody else. I might seem like that right now, but I'm not. I'm just, this is more for my own understanding, and I'm just sharing here. We, um, and guess what, a lot of this talking, a lot of the phrases, people forward all these great things, posts, and share the posts and like the posts and all that stuff. What we do is we tend to look at it and we go, oh, wow, that looks great, and we share further, right? But it has not really changed me as I'm going through it. So especially now with the way the flood of stimulation that is coming across to us, we don't have time to kind of like sit with one thought. Um, we want a quick, next thing, right? We are in abundance of useless knowledge, uh, and we share it, mostly to look good to others. Others do the same, right? So we all kind of encourage this behavior amongst each other. It's sort of like, we are in this soup of, useless knowledge. Books, be it likes and shares, and have created a whole crowd of vainly wise folks, to impress others. Wisdom, as Gita wants to talk about, or anything, or even the wisdom as you're reading something, as you're reading whatever, right? You have that aha moment, You go, oh my God, this is so great. But it is lost on us because, and when we are acting, when some crisis happens, um, yes, it is there. It's almost like we know that stuff, but we can't really use it when we need it. And it's always constantly hanging there. We know so much about Buddha, we know so much about, let's say, Gita, or anything else for that matter. Um, um, so yeah, I mean, this is it has been there. Our society is still as, if not more, worst than back then, right? So one of the Swami says that, even bad habits have an instant effect internally. Like, you do something bad, you immediately will feel something. You might not do anything about it, but internally it'll have an impact. But the so-called good habits, that we read something, we say, like, I read this book and all that stuff, right? You're really waiting for the other person to say, oh my God, that is so great, right? But it has no inward effect. What we think is, it's just enough for me to just tell that this other person, and that's it. We are done there. So knowledge causes inner revolution, change now, not later, right? So, you know and you will notice this, right? There will be something, you are just, you're watching a movie, or you are out talking to somebody. There are a lot of these unconscious things that your mind is picking up. And again, this will lead into the whole mindfulness conversation. But those unconscious things, you're not really taking notes, you're not doing anything, but the fact that you were present there, uh, it is coming to you, and it will change you, because we are living in this whole floating life. We are not really digging deeper in every individual engagement. We sort of miss that, but we are affecting each other as we go along. And this can be a little more mindful. And that knowledge gaining is that is happening now, right? It's not happening like, okay, I'm going to come back to this later on, and that might or might not happen, right? um, and the Swami says that, the best thing to do is that you want to experiment a lot. And if something doesn't click with you, drop it, move on, go to the next thing. Maybe Bible connects with you, and that's okay. Maybe Quran connects with you, and that's okay. But go on the path, right? Go on the journey, and be it whatever. I don't care. I mean, it has nothing to do with religion, actually. But any book, for that matter. And this whole divine and eternal standard, that we talked about earlier, has to do with this inner wealth, right? The growth of inner wealth. Um, So people who are dwelling in that divine nature, right? Not religiously worshiping, people going to temples. That's not the point. The point is where your inner wealth is high enough, right? They can eventually see that imperishable me, right? From whom all the existences originate. And so knowing that, right, they turn to me with a soul and entire love. So one really neat thing that in that No Self book comes about is that when you start acting from that place of no self, where you immediately observe that this self is dragging you into this position of being anger and all that stuff, what happens is you suddenly start becoming this compassionate being. You don't wait for other people to see your compassion or anything like that. It just becomes part of your, like, second nature, if you will, or the first nature, if you will, right? And that is that divine nature, or the inner wealth growth, if you will. Always adoring me, this comes back to that whole bhakti, right? God steadfast in spiritual endeavor, bowing down to me with devotion, has nothing to do with a master slave relationship whatsoever. This is just bowing down here. Really, all it means is this notion of being humble, right? humble to everything that you are facing out there, be it in your interaction with your kids or interaction with your friends or neighbors or any hateful person for that matter, right? So-called hateful. Um, they worship me ever in yoga, and that is what he wants to define as worship, not so much. And he does say at some point, he says, if you want to go to a temple and present some flowers on a deity, that's fine. If it makes you happy, guess what? That is coming to me, that me being the consciousness, right? You're doing that because you feel good, right? So it is about you, that prayer and all of that stuff. But there's more to just putting those flowers there on that deity. There are other things as well, right? Um, so God is but a device for that ultimate bliss, right? Bhakti is more of a quality of godliness. God, if we are expecting God to be another human being or a superhuman or some alien being and all that stuff, that's a waste of time, right? God is a quality. And H.G. Wells has this really interesting quote on Buddha. He says that he's the most godless person, right? I mean, whole Buddhism is based around notion of no God. Yet he comes across as the most godly person, right? Um, so, all right. So there are three ways of the the devotion, right? One is with our hands, like what you do out there. One is with your heart, right? You close your eyes and you do the prayer. It's not so much about the flowers offering and all that stuff, but there's something within you. And then there is one with the head, right? With your intellect in a way. So the way I look at this is this distinction between these three things is with the hand, meaning the karma yoga, right? Heart, the love, is the bhakti yoga, where you are, um, love is outwards towards the other, right? We need the others. I thought I had that somewhere. I didn't know which slide it was, but we need the other. So what bhakti, the middle six chapters is trying to say is that, we always need the other, right? We are full of love. We like when people receive our love, and we want to give love, and we want to be loved, right? So that is a fundamental thing that drives a lot of our desires, a lot of our things. If you really go down to the root of it, um, we want to be loved, we want to be noticed, and that notice is also about love, right? We have associated that, unfortunately, with the likes and shares on social media, and I'm sorry about that. But that needs to be understood a bit more deeper here in this whole bhakti context, is that love depends on that lover, but can we become loving all the time, right? It doesn't matter who it is then, right? So that is where what helps is to understand this notion of God everywhere. And you are loving God, and that means you can love anybody, right? In a way. Um, and there is something beautiful about this middle six ways of living. Um, there is there are so many varieties of these relationships that have been developed by the so-called bhaktas, or the devotees in India, or be it in the Muslim world or even Christianity, right? Where you treat the Bhagwan, or the God, as the lover or the husband or mother or the friend and all that stuff, right? So there's so many beautiful poetries. So when you think of that undetectable me or the immutable me, there's a very dry way of looking at it, where you say, "Oh, there's no God," right? And then you become all this really strict and stern-looking person. But you could also be singing songs, enjoy life, and you enjoy it in the understanding that we are with this loving God, and this other person, I'm trying to relate with this other person in a loving nature, compassionate nature. So uh, so the beauty of these middle six chapters is that it kind of underlines the colors of life in a way, right? So if you look at all the different celebrations that happen in India, so many festivals that we have, right? And it's a way for us to connect with other people, or so many beautiful songs that have been written about, love, or, it could be devotional songs, but it is also, there's, if you've heard of, uh, oh, damn it, why am I forgetting the name? The famous poet. Anyways, so he talks about drinking, right? Drinking wine. But that drinking wine is, if you really cut off the layers, um, it's talking about this becoming, sort of losing oneself, meaning losing the ego in this godliness, if you will, right? So there's a lot of these layers that you can look at, the Sufi poetry, for example, poetries, for example, um, from the Islamic world. Um, yeah, so Dharma has a lot of, I, the path and goal, the upholder, seed of all, and their eternal resting place. Um, So yeah, I mean, religion, the way we understand, there's one way to look at it is that, we're bound to a certain understanding. That's what these sects and castes want us to do. Most India has become like that, unfortunately. But what the book wants to tell us, or Gita, or highest form of Hinduism wants to tell us, is this dharma, or what you are, your fundamental nature, is all about actually setting you free. Arjuna was the warrior. So understanding your true nature is the purpose of this life. So if you satisfy that purpose of your life 100%, right, then you have set yourself in the mode of liberation. And there's a lot of different stories that come about, of prostitutes and, thieves and, saintly people and all of that stuff, where how they have reached their liberation through whatever dharma that they have come to on this planet. And he says that I'm the dharma holding this all expanse together, like this whole cosmos. And I was always there all the time, right? So there's a lot of this stuff that he's talking about here. And he is trying to say that that is my deeper swabhava, my dharma, my law of nature, is to allow these forms to come and go in front of me and not be influenced by those forms myself. And again, it's not just Krishna, right? It's all of us. So we can see these forms come and go. Human beings behave certain way and go away. We become sad and happy, and that is also a form, right? It's a form of a thought that comes and goes away. So there's a way for us to kind of look at it as a witness and not participate in that. Um, Yeah, so I mean, again, he's impressing upon the prayer and the devotion aspect. So then chapter 10 is about that shocking moment, right? That shocking moment really confuses those selves. We, for a second, we forget I'm the mother, or I'm this, or I'm anything. And in chapter 10, he talks about vibhuti, which is like, Arjuna is now wanting to know, like, how can I see you? How can I know you? And all that stuff. So he says, he gives the different things that were contemporaneous for their time, right? But we can have a different interpretation for our times. Like when we talked about chapter 10, we said, like, there are so many impressive people around us, or impressive mountains, or beauty, or something really fearful, shocking, right? So in those situations, one has to ask oneself, is it the baggage that is bringing you that, or you can actually understand that beauty at a very fundamental level? Like, for example, a rose is presented to you. rose comes with its baggage, right? So you immediately want to say, this is beautiful. Well, when you want to hold that thought and just appreciate the petals and the colors and all of that stuff, right? Now you're suddenly sort of appreciating God in a way, right? You are not really biased by the layer of words. So that exercise is like sort of he eventually, the last sentence says, he says that whatever beautiful and glorious creature thou seest in the world, whatever being is mighty and forceful, know to be a very splendor, light, and energy of me, right? And born of a potent potion and intense power of my existence, right? So again, we can appreciate this beauty and all of that stuff because of our consciousness. Um, and so that is what he is trying to say, that is me. That was a lot of that is in chapter 10. And then chapter 11, a lot of people think like, oh, that's like the big sort of like the climax moment, right? Where he shows his this huge uh, incarnation, or sort of his nature, where Virat is what they call it, right? The large being of God, where he has like hundreds of mouths and hundreds of hands and all of that, right? But that there is a way to look at it where, a lot of people want to take it literally, which is fine. But there's also a deeper way to look at it, which is it is Arjuna's journey, or our journey, as we start looking at God being creator and a destructor, a destroyer. So how can it make us, if we really understand that, it will bring us to this overwhelming sense of almost fear, if you will, right? Oh my God, right? Like this, we are blindly. So there is one imagery that they talk about, right? Where he says, as I look upon thy mouths terrible with many tusks of destruction, right? So this is Arjuna imagining, right? That God is also the cause for so many deaths. And a lot of these deaths are so like scary, people dying in car crashes or any of that stuff, right? So that is happening. So it can be quite shocking to the system to realize that that is also God, right? So he goes through this good-natured God to this scary nature of God, and then he says, like, bring yourself back to a peaceful self. In fact, he says here, speaking of destruction, I'm the time spirit, right? This time spirit is sort of like a loose translation of the word Kala in Sanskrit, destroyer of the word, right? Kala also means time. Kala also means destruction, right? Or destroyer. So it's interesting, that word in Sanskrit, because time is destroying us, if you think about it. Destroyer of the world, even without thee, all these warriors shall be not, right? So he is telling him again that, look, all these people are going to die. This war is happening regardless of you being here or not. So who are ranked in the opposing armies. Therefore arise, get thee glory, right? Conquer thy enemies. Glory here means that not win the Nobel Prize, right? But really, you have been brought on this planet, all of these events that have happened, you are here for a reason. And you need to fight this. That way you are peaceful with whatever all the series of karmas have brought you to this stage. If you leave this undone, go to the forest, you are going to cause all kinds of trouble by doing that, right? Because karma has brought you to this place, and you can't just neglect that. Conquer thy enemies, enjoy an opulent kingdom, right? That is what he wanted all along, right? Arjuna, and he says, you'd better do that. By me and none other already even are they slain, right? Everybody is already killed. If you look at from that undetectable me perspective, immutable me perspective, right? There we are kind of like micro second of existence from that perspective. So we come and go, we've already been killed from that perspective. Do thou become the occasion only, right? So he wants him to be one phraseology a lot of people use is like, you are just the flute and God is playing the music through you in a way. So it's an interesting imagery in this chapter, which a lot of people have very different understandings. And, I think it is just a personal journey of Arjuna where this deeper understanding can be quite overwhelming. And good and bad is part of the whole God. And then 12, the final chapter, he kind of concludes on the notion of, you can believe in a formed God or a formless God, right? He asks, Krishna says, well, what should I do? Should I believe in a formed God, like or should I think of that unmanifested, immutable me? Should I be looking for that? And he says the difficulty of those who devote themselves to the search of the unmanifest Brahmana is greater. So why is that, right? With a formed God, mind is busy in the forms, right? So one of the things us as living beings is that mind wants to stay busy with something, right? Some form, be it like I'm looking at this laptop or you guys are looking at me, I guess, or whatever, right? All kinds of things. So mind essentially assumes the form that it is busy in, like whatever it is watching. I'm looking at the window as I'm talking, right? So my mind is taking on that form. This is explained by the Swami, right? Ego or mind is dissolved over time. So the idea here is that this mind, the form, it's almost kind of like a skin, like our skin. So for you to say like, oh yeah, I understand the formless God and that's it, right? But there it is very hard to drop off this mind forming the forms. So to stop mind from doing that, it is very, very painful process, meaning that, how can you not get impacted by that person who interrupted us, right? We all, for a moment, we got angry, we got scared, and we were confused, right? That is to not do that is almost like not our nature, right? It is very, very difficult. So to get to that place, what chapter 7 through 12 does is it says it will ease you into that, where you slowly kind of take this skin off of you. But if you go directly to the unmanifest Brahman and you immediately want to believe that and you say, okay, that's it, I got it, I don't have to worship any God, no such thing, because that is all comic and just silly, all that stuff, right? So what you're doing is that you are actually boosting your ego. That's all you're doing, because it is really very, very hard to get rid of that mind, as much as you would try. But if you do this longer with bhakti, slowly the mind gets dissolved over time. God is all there. God is I and you and everything. First you start with this notion of God is all there is out there, or start with one God or whoever, and then God is I and you and everything, right? But a lot of this is sort of lost in our society in a way, right? Given our progress in science. So we might, a lot of the times what happens is, when we are presented with this kind of a notion of a God as a deity or a formless God, meaning no God, right? So we can easily associate with God, right? Part of it is that we want to justify either one of them all the time, right? How can one easily see a human being like Krishna as God, right? So that is in this state where we are saying, okay, see a God in a little statue. Okay. First of all, that you will find ridiculous. But then you go further and say, okay, there's God in that neighbor or that obnoxious person who interrupted us. Okay, that's now you're stretching the limit, isn't it? So that is not at all easy. So we say, okay, you know what? God is formless. It's none of these things. They're all mean people. God is formless. That's what I'm going to associate with, right? So we are always finding a reason to not really go on the journey. Um, and then, a lot of us tend to want to fight about gods and no gods, right? And there's all these different discussions that you see, debates online, and two gods, right? Two gods, there's two religions fighting amongst each other, right? Again, rather than using the religion for one's personal growth, we are trying to prove each other that my God is better than your God. So the devotion is really, be it with Krishna or whoever, is to change oneself. And it's definitely not about getting more likes for Krishna or Christ. uh, okay, so I'm going to skip. So what is in the last couple of minutes here, right? So he talks about from 13 till 20, he talks a little bit about what are the attributes of a good devotee. Now, so as we said, right, God makes it easy for all of us, rest of us. We are not all Buddha, because Buddha actually, he went through the journey of going from gods to gods to gods, and he came to an understanding that is his own understanding. Even in Buddhism, by the way, right, there is, they all sing this mantra. They say Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, right? What that means is like, oh, Buddha is the God and we pray to Buddha. But then Buddha also said, like, apadipo bhava, meaning you are your own light. So there also, even the no God religion ended up having this notion of Buddham Sharanam Gacchami, meaning I surrender to you, Buddha. It's not about Buddha being the master, but this feeling of surrendering and the humility that it brings about. So I'll just read one of these here. He who has no egoism, no I-ness and minus, right? So this is those cells outside that you're associating with today. And who has friendship and pity for all the beings, and hate for no living thing, who has a tranquil equality to pleasure and pain, and is patient and forgiving. He who has a desireless content, right? Your consciousness is completely no desires, right? The steadfast control of self and the firm, unshakable will and resolution of the yogi, and a love and devotion which gives up the whole mind and reason to me, meaning that no self, right? Not the mind on me being the mother, or me being the son, or me being the father, me being the engineer and earn that next promotion and all that stuff, right? He is dear to me, he says. So here, like, it doesn't matter, it's not the collection of these attributes, but you pick any one of them, right? You say, okay, no I-ness and minus. I think even on that path, all of these other things will just kind of follow along, right? The moment you just pick like friendship or pity for all the human beings, even just that thing, or no hate for any living thing or anything, right? I think that any of these attributes is like enough, right? You are already on that journey, but he's just giving us like all kinds of a plethora of things to think about here. So yeah, I think that's it. Sorry, I don't know. Maybe you guys still there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Sashi. And
So
yeah, I remember this part. Each chapter are very long, like 40 something, right? Some are shorter, like 16, 15. That's and I remember in like 10, 11, so like go to like 40, each chapter goes like 40 verses.
oh no,
So
18 is the longest. It's gonna have 70 or 80 or something.
18 is very long. I know. Yeah. Yeah,
But
sure.
yeah, we'll
Anyway,
ultimately, now all we can do here is kind of like trigger a small thing, and you guys will take your own journey. I mean, nothing here is hard in stone, obviously.
yeah, I don't know. Anyone have a question?